So in this video, I want to talk about something that a lot of you are going to run into as you're working on your final projects in this class, and it's this concept of where state is accessible. So React has this documentation page that in the main concepts that's all about this key concept of lifting the state up. So you often will have several components in your application that need access to the same data. And when that happens, what you want to do is, instead of putting the data in those individual components, raise the data up to whatever their closest ancestor is that they have in common. So their closest parent element. So you can read through this page. This goes through how to lift the state up using a sample application of converting temperature. I'm going to go through a slightly different example. We'll do a little bit of whiteboarding, then we'll build it together. We're going to sort of put the quiz game aside for a second, and then we'll bring this concept back into the quiz game. So let's pretend that we're building maybe like a little adventure game, and on the first page there's an entry field for the character name, and then there's like a next button which takes you to another page, which maybe allows you to configure your like character type. Maybe this is like a drop down of kind of like, are you human? Are you an elf? Are you something else? Next. And you could have all sorts of other pages. I'm just going to do 2 pages here. And then our final one would be like where the game is actually taking place, and we want to use the character's name here. So like welcome, and then we're going to put the name in here, and we'll use the character's type in here. So maybe it'll be like welcome name, comma, type. Let's start the game. And the key problem that we're running into here is that this page has the name state, and this page has the type state. This page, we want to use both of those things. We want the name and we want the type accessible on this last page. So our application might look something like this. We've got an app component. Let's have we're going to have I'm going to leave out the routing from this diagram to keep it a little bit more clear, but we would need the browser router, the switch, the routes in here. But let's say we have name page. Oops. And we have type page. And we have game page. So inside of name page here, this is where we would have normally, when we're trying to make this, the use state, where we create the name, and this would be where we use state to create the type. And then the problem would be, like, how do we, from the game page, get access to any of those things? And the key concept with React is that if we need that data, so we need the name and type accessible across multiple components here, that instead of storing that state in these individual components, you want to raise it up and store it in the parent, so the common ancestor. So if we're looking at these 3 elements here that are all within the app as a child, this is where we would want, this in the app is where we would want to create that name and type state. When we create it in the app, we can pass it down to child elements as props, so they will have access to it. So all 3 of these will be able to read and change the name and type if we want, because we can pass those down as props. So one of the key sort of design paradigms that React embraces is that data flows from the top down. So if we want data to be stored accessible across multiple components and multiple components to be able to react to that data, we want to move that data up in our hierarchy, in our component tree, and pass data down as needed. So let me drop in a couple bullet points here. So we're going to use state in an ancestor parent, and then we will pass state down to child components. So I'm going to put the whiteboard away. I'm going to create a new React app. So I'm going to grab a terminal window in my project folder for my class materials for week 5 and use create React app. I'm going to call this the state demo. I'm going to pause the video while this is installing and come back when it's finished. Okay, so it has finished. You can open up this in Visual Studio Code by doing code dot to open the current directory. Oh, whoops. Let's see. Go into my state demo. So CD in there, and then I can open it up with code like this, or I could find the folder in File Explorer and open it up that way. So I am just going to get rid of everything in here to create a new structure. Create a new index.js. And import React from React. Import React DOM from React DOM. I'm going to need to create a components folder. And let's create an app.js component. And whoops, not the right expansion here. So React functional component with export. Import my app. And then render that app to the document. Start up my server. And after a second, we should hopefully, there we go, we see app show up here. So I kind of want to stub out this page really simply. So here's our whiteboard. I want to, or stub out this application. So I'm going to create a name entry page, a character type page, and then that like final screen as separate components here. So to do that, I need React Router. So I'm grabbing React Router DOM and installing it as an external, because it's an external dependency. We need to bring it into our project. It doesn't come along with Create React App with the initial setup. And after I run that npm install, we should see the router show up here. I'm going to pause it while it finishes installing. Okay, so we're back and that finished. I can see it in my package.json. So now I could go back into my app and start setting up these routes with these different pages. So I'm going to create a new folder pages, and I want to create a name page. And I'm just going to copy and paste this to create the type page. And I'm hitting F2 to rename this type page, which renames here and here. Do the same thing for the game page. And then back in my app, I can bring in the stuff that we've used with React Router before. So we need the browser router, we need a switch, we need the route from React Router DOM. And then instead of returning this, we want to return the browser router around everything in our application so that we can use all of the pieces of React Router, drop in a switch, which tells us that whatever happens inside the switch, it's only going to match one route, and then we will create our routes here. And the route gets that path parameter where we can say what is the URL that needs to match for this route to load. So I'm just going to copy and paste that, and in here we want to drop in our name page. And if I hit tab, it will auto import up at the top here. Let's grab the type page. And let's grab the game page. And since the way that this matches is from top to bottom, as we've talked about before, you want to make sure that you either add the exact here to this first one to make sure that it only matches the first slash and nothing else, because all these other routes start with a slash. So this would be caught if we didn't have the exact and went to /type, this route would catch that and load the name page instead of the type page. So here I'll add the exact prop to make sure that this works, and let's have this be the game page. So if I have set all of this up correctly, I've got my imports up here, we should be able to go back to our browser here. We can see name page, and then if I go to type, /type, load the type page. I got to make sure that each of these pages has some unique content in it. They all say name page. So let's say type page, name page, game page. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. So home page, we see name, then type, then game. And let's, while we're at it, add a little link to each of these that takes you to the next page. So I'm going to import link from React Router DOM. Link to, from the type page, we want to go to the game page. I'm going to add a little arrow here. And let's put this in an H1, so type page. And I'm going to put a placeholder here. We're going to have a form. Enter type here. And then I'm going to copy this over to my name page here and return this. Import link from React Router DOM. Make sure that this says name page. And enter name here. And let's see. I wrapped this in a div, so this page is giving me an error because I didn't wrap all of this in a div. I think I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it wrapped in a main here. And I'm going to rename this by hitting F2, rename to main, and hit enter. And let's make sure that this is also main. And let's put this in an H1. Okay, so going to the home page, we would have our form here where we enter the name. We can click next. Whoops. Make sure that my name page doesn't go to game, but goes to type. And we should hopefully have this sequence. So name page, next, type page, next, game page. And this is where we want to have that sort of, well, we'll put a placeholder there. To do, welcome the player by name and type. Right, so we want to be able to access whatever was entered on these previous pages on this last page. What I'm going to do for this video is probably take this state of the application currently, zip it up, and have it accessible as a starting point. So you can download it, run npm install, and then work from this if you want to follow along. And I'll also have the final project attached to it. So all we did in this version is really just set up things we've done before. I just went through it really quickly, and that can help as a refresher of how to use browser route or switch route, but you don't have to do that to follow along. You can just download the starter files. So what I want to do from here is start building out these individual pages. So our name page, how we would have approached this previously is thought, well, we're going to have some input here, so we're going to need to use state. So I would create the name, set name, equal to use state here, and start it as an empty string. And then I need to make sure that I import use state. So I'm going to hit Control space at the end of the E in state and select the auto import option, or just type it in up here. In my form, I want to create an input of type text. I'm not going to need the name or ID. Set the value equal to name. On change, gonna have to create a function here on name change. So we got an arrow function, it takes an event, and then we can use set name event.target.value to pull whatever the current value is from our input and place it into our name state. So while we're at it, let's throw a label around this. Enter your name. Let's check it out, make sure that this works before moving on. So I'm going to go back to my home page, enter your name. Whoops. Okay, so one thing that I want to make sure happens here is that as I'm typing, if I hit enter, that submits the form. I want to prevent this form from doing its default thing, which tries to load another page and send whatever you typed into the form to that page. So what I want to do here is on submit prevent default. So this is just a mini arrow function that I'm writing. I could have broken this out into a named function like we did here, but this is a shorter syntax, and for one-line functions, sometimes I like doing this shorter version. Okay, so I can type a name, hit next. So the problem is that I've got this variable that's stored inside of my name page, and if I want to use it on any of these other pages, like my type page or my game page, this is going to give me an error if I try and read the name. That doesn't exist anywhere. So the way that we can make this accessible is going back to our whiteboard diagram. Instead of storing the state inside of name page, store it in one of the ancestors. So one of the parent elements. Then we're able to pass it to these different pages. So instead of storing the state here, I'm going to copy this, which is going to cause this page to give us some errors if I pop open my terminal, because now this page does not know what name is, and it does not know what set name is, because I've just moved those. But we're going to fix that in a second. So I'm coming back to my app, which is the parent of all of these pages. And I am creating my state here. I'm going to make sure that I import use state. And by setting the state here, I can now pass it to any component that I want to via props. So these are props. We've been using them a lot so far. And a prop allows you to pass some data into a component or configure that component. So for this name page, if I want to pass in these two pieces of information, I can say name equals name, set name equals set name. So now name page is getting a name prop that is equal to whatever this variable is. That's what this curly bracket over here indicates. And set name, it's getting a set name prop, which is equal to this set name function that we created in our app. So if I go back to the name page, I now have props in here. And from those props, I can pull out those name and set name properties. And now this component should compile. We're getting a warning here because I still have use state, which we're no longer using. That warning's gone away. So this page should function as it has before, where I can type in my name and the state changes. The difference is where that state is stored. So if I pull up my components tab here to see my hierarchy for my page, and I click on app, that's where the state is stored. So as I type my state updates in my app, that app can then pass that down to our name page in the form of these props. So name is set to Brian, and set name is this function that is used to change our name. So we've moved our state from name page up to app for our name and passed it in via props. The great thing about that is that if we wanted our type page to print out something like welcome name, let's set up your type. If I want to pass in the name here, I just need to declare it as a prop. So back in app, I can say the type page now should also have access to the name. It doesn't need access to the set name because it's not trying to change the name. But if I pass in the name like this and grab my props, I can say props.name. So here I'm accessing, back in app, the value of this prop. So it should say welcome name. Let's set up your type. Let's reload this. Mike. Welcome, Mike. Let's set up your type. So we've now just shared a piece of state across these two pages. And we can see that here too. My app has the state, and my type page here gets that as a prop named under the under the string here, name. So the key for that prop is name, and the value is Mike. So if we want to do the same thing for our type page, because we want to share that type information with the game page, we would do the same thing up here, create our state, set type equal to use state, and we will default it to an empty string. Our type page now needs these things available to it. So now we are passing in the value of this type variable under the prop, with the prop name being type. And we're passing in this function that allows us to change the type, and we're passing it under the prop set type. So if I go back to my type page, I'm going to replicate what we did on the other page here for our name page. So I'm going to copy this form over, enter your type, and so props is this object that has, if I, let's bring them side by side. So remember, props, that ends up being an object with each of these as keys, and then these are the values that get passed in. So object destructuring, which we saw when we were learning the fundamentals of JavaScript, allows us to destructure an object and pull out its individual fields into variables. So as long as these variable names match the names of the props, this will work. So I can pull out the name, the name, the type, and the set type from our props. And then in here, I can just say name instead of props.name. My value for this type input is type. And on change, we're going to need to create a new on type change handler here. So const on type change is an arrow function that takes an event and calls set type on event.target.value. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a single pane view here, make sure that I save all my pages here, and let's see what we've got in the browser. So I'm going to go back to my home page, enter my name, enter my character type. Let's be a rogue. And so right now I don't have anything printing out on my game page, but if I click on my app, I can see that that state is stored there. So Mike and rogue. So everything is working, and then it's just a matter of deciding what information the game page needs. So if I flip back and go to my app, for this game page, I can say, well, the game is going to need the player's name, and it's going to need the player's type. And if I go to my game page, I can fill in this to-do. So we can say something like, welcome props.name, and then we can insert the props.type to the adventure. Let's go. So I'm going to start the flow back at that main page, type in Mike again, rogue, welcome Mike the rogue to the adventure. So we're able, with this new concept of passing state down as props, to be able to share state across multiple pages in our application. One thing that I want to clarify, back in my app here, these don't have to match. I'm in charge of saying what the prop name is, and this is the value of it. So if I wanted to change my game page, and the prop on the game page was different than our variable here, that would be fine. So for instance, if I rename this variable here, so I'm going to hit F2 to rename it to character, or let's call it player name. And I'm going to rename set name to set player name. I'm just hitting F2 and then hitting enter after renaming it. So you can see that this prop here is the key that we then have to use on our name page, pulling out here, name. It doesn't have to match this value that we're passing in here, this variable for our state. So if I run it, flip back to the browser, go to the home page, it still works. Oops, rogue. All of it still works. So this is the name of your prop. This is the value that should be passed into that prop. Same thing here, same thing here. I find it easier to make sure that my names are consistent, but you don't have to make sure that they match exactly. Okay, so that's pretty much it for how to lift state up. This then ends up with you explicitly creating a lot of props to pass information down, and we'll talk in the future about there are state management libraries that help you try to solve this problem. If you're curious and want to do some exploration on your own, there is a mechanism called React Context, which allows you to set up a context that then deeply nested components can get access to some data in your application. So that's just something that comes with React. And then there are libraries like Redux that are specifically state management libraries that help you deal with this concept of having state in your application and making it accessible to your components. But the simplest way to work through this is to do what we just did here, is make sure that you are defining your state at the place where it is needed. So we defined our state in app because multiple child elements needed that state. So you may, while working on your final projects, have to refactor things to move state around, but it's not a big deal. It's just a matter of making sure that you move the state to the right place and then pass it down as props to the components that need it.